Allora.
Could you take your seats, please? And come here, nearer, so we don't have to worry about the face masks. Let me introduce myself. I'm the moderator of this first session, which is the opening session with opening addresses. First of all, I'd like to thank all participants. We're very happy with the Fondazione Basso to have once again the opportunity of organizing an event in presence after such a long time that we were sort of confined to online dialogues, which were useful but did not allow for a fully fruitful exchange of ideas, which is only sort of possible in presence meetings. So I was talking about that with President Ippolito, who sits next to me, that this is the fourth time that the Fondazione Basso has organized a meeting focusing on the protection of financial interest of the European Union. So far, we focused mostly on the preparatory phase, the design phase, and the establishment phase of the European Public Prosecutor's Office. Today, EPPO is up and running. It took a long time to get it going. I have personally followed some of the various steps in the process in Brussels on behalf of the Italian government. It was a complicated process, but eventually we managed to establish this crucial prosecuting body of the European Union, which will hopefully result into a more effective protection of financial interests of European citizens, as I would prefer to call it, rather than the European Union alone, because we are the citizens and the taxpayers. So the European citizens are entitled to see that the money is being properly used. So let's open the session. We have the pleasure of giving the floor to Mrs. Codruta Covesi, who is the Chief European Prosecutor, that unfortunately could not be with us here in Rome, so she will be connected with us with a distant connection. So, and I'd like to greet the Chief Prosecutor.
Presence, and you're here, you're there. Yeah. And of course, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Dear Vice President of the Superior Council of Magistracy, dear General Commander of Guardia di Finanza, dear President of the Foundation Basso, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to share with you a few introductory words to this important conference. There is no doubt that one of the recent European integration landmarks is the establishment of the European Public Prosecutor Office. By design, by its competencies, tools, and potential, the EPPO will have a major influence on the overall anti-fraud architecture of the EU. Our role is to improve the level of protection of the financial interest of the EU. We are investigating fraud involving EU funds of over 10,000 euro and cross-border VAT fraud involving damage above 10 million euro. We are not a coordinator. We are not a network. We are not an EU agency issuing recommendations to responsible national authorities. We are a single prosecution office acting in 22 member states. Our European delegated prosecutors are embedded in the respective national systems with full prosecutorial powers. Our prosecutorial policy is to focus on those cases where serious organized criminality is involved, and our main objective is to help the member states recover the damages. What makes EPPO special? We are unifying the approach to EU fraud investigations in all the participating member states. We have the ability to investigate cross-border crimes without cumbersome mutual legal assistance formalities so far in 22 member states of the EU. Just to give you an example, in one of our big carousel fraud cases, recently we performed house searches and froze assets in 5 member states simultaneously. Instead of months, it took us weeks to get this organized. In fact, most of the measures assigned were finalized in less than 3 weeks. This is really amazing. Our case management system gives direct access to all the information in our cases in all the participating member states. We have the ability to identify related investigations between several member states and to merge them. We have a deep knowledge of the legal system of 22 member states. A close cooperation with Europol, Olaf, and Eurojust can be established from the initial stage of any investigation. Ladies and gentlemen, on 1st June, we started operations. We have processed more than 2,000 criminal reports and initiated more than 350 EPPO investigations. Between 2017, when the EPPO regulation was adopted, and today, the overall volume of the financial interests of the EU has almost doubled. We will also have new own resources. The COVID-19 pandemic has weakened our economies and made them more vulnerable to criminal infiltration. The risks of corruption has increased. I am convinced that the EPPO has the potential to change the paradigm of cross-border investigations involving organized crime and financial fraud in the EU. I thank the organizers of this very timely conference and wish you very interesting discussions with my estimate colleagues, European prosecutors and European delegated prosecutors who participate in good numbers. I trust that through their professionalism, they will explain you better than me what EPPO is and what EPPO can do. Thank you very much for your attention.
Si sente.
O meno di alcune norme del...
There are a few roles in our own system that we can deal with. This is an international conference with a very broad range of experts attending it. So we will sort of deal with specific themes, and I'm very pleased to be able to take part in this discussion. EPPO's themes may sound technical themes, but they are crucial for the current situation during the pandemic, but it will also be crucial in the years to come for the future of Europe. We know that we're going to be confronted with a European landscape which is very delicate and with a considerable scope for the future of the Union. The Union has adopted economic measures and financial resources which are unprecedented, way above the Marshall Plan funding, which after the war promoted the reconstruction of our own country and the other countries in Europe. Well, but it's Europe itself, rather than other countries, that is sort of ensuring that this is being executed. I'm talking about European peoples. The long-term budget agreement, which is also accompanied by the Next Generation EU, is a turning point. It's a new phase in European project, which goes beyond the ambitious project of the recovery of the economies that have been devastated by the pandemic, in the momentum to achieve a sort of a reset. I see that there is a common approach to create a Europe on the basis of sustainable development models, but also the need to recover cohesion and community spirit, which belonged to the original project of Europe, and which is a prerequisite to play a key role in a geopolitical landscape which is being developed. We have a very large amount of funding provided by the Union. We'll have a total of 2,000 billion euros, and the protection of the financial interest of the Union and the fight against fraud, as was indicated in the latest PIF directive, will be sort of possible to lead to a more resilient Europe. The financial interests of the Union, today more than ever, are sort of primary importance, and they can only be based on an effective anti-fraud policy. This is something which is going to be discussed during the conference. I'd like to emphasize, in light of what I just said, that the check on the legality and the fight against distortions in the rules, the proper use being made of finances, will consolidate the feeling of confidence of citizens in the Union bodies. The anti-fraud fight and the protection of financial interests has made it necessary to create a very complex architecture. And with the final step, with the establishment of the European Public Prosecutor's Office, which is a fundamental step in the consolidation of the common European area, which does promote a vertical logic of integration at different levels in administering justice. I think that the synergy and a complementarity between the European Public Prosecutor's Office and the Anti-Fraud Office will improve the technical organizational capabilities to combat financial crimes and corruption harming the Union. Italy has always been a strong advocate of anti-fraud policies at Union level. We have had many sort of Italian officials at the top level of such bodies, and I'd like to, we have with us Dr. Bianchi, and the EPPO is something that Italy has been striving to achieve since its very initial steps with the project which was put forward in 2013. As Giovanni Falcone had understood, is quite the economic dimension of organized crime requires greater legal integration between countries and the creation of supranational anti-fraud and anti-corruption instruments, while with the higher Council for the Judiciary has followed with great interest the whole process and the initial regulation to establish EPPO and the appointment of delegated European prosecutors, as was laid down in the agreement between the EPPO and the anti-fraud Olaf. Economic and financial crimes harming the Union will be fought in an effective manner, because we do have in Italy this culture of coordination of investigations, and the Italian delegated prosecutors have a long-standing experience with the fight against the organized crime. And I see that there is a widespread awareness that the EPPO will play a crucial role in the anti-fraud landscape of the Union. and the unique role in the protection of financial interest and the control of legality. And I'd like to mention two specific steps which point to that. I have in mind the signing of the collaboration protocol between the Court of Editors of Italy and the EPPO for the exchange of information which could be useful for investigation. And the sort of working, it's a first working arrangement which has been signed by a national court of auditors. And hopefully this is going to be followed by similar examples. And we have to mention the forum which convened all the topmost officials of the European Public Prosecutor's Office, the law enforcement bodies. I think I'd like to simply conclude by saying that the viability of the budget of our country and the other countries in Europe depend on the possibility of spending correctly the funding which is available and the effectiveness of national bodies responsible for ensuring such a protection. What is at stake are not just our economies, but the credibility of European citizens. So I'd like to thank you for your collaboration, and I wish the very best for the success of this meeting. Unfortunately, I have a very busy day, so I have to go and attend the meeting of the Higher Council of the Judiciary. So, and I thank you very much for the honor I have been granted to attend this meeting. Thank you.
Noi che ringraziamo il vicepresidente.
We'd like to in turn thank Vice President Ermini. I have been retired for a year now, but as a magistrate, I belong to a group of colleagues who have worked for many years in designing the institutions, not just the EPPO. I think it was one of the initial directive Corpus Juris 2002, but we have been working towards achieving a common approach and working methods across all the sort of bodies involved in the judiciary in the various European countries. I'd like to mention here a friend who passed away, Eugenio Selvaggi, who worked very hard towards the establishment of EPPO, a man whose competence and expertise was well valued in Europe. And I've personally been working with him, so I think that the efforts and the achievements he has attained were not lost. So we now call upon General Fabrizio Cuneo, who is commander of the special group of the fiscal police in Italy. Just one word as my personal experience. I worked as liaison magistrate in France for a couple of years, and I sort of felt on many occasions that our colleagues were very sort of envious of Italy having having the fiscal police, Guardia di Finanza, which is a highly specialized law enforcement body. So it gives me great pleasure to give the floor to General Cuneo. Please.
Buongiorno, un saluto da parte del Comandante Generale della Guardia di Finanza,
on behalf
Generale Zaffarana,
of the
purtroppo non può essere presente.
We can.
Proviamo. Mi fa piacere perché valorizza il messaggio. Prova.
testing.
Funziona?
Are we good?
Procediamo.
Okay. We
Dicevo un
Can
saluto da
continue.
parte del
So,
comandante generale della
greetings
Guardia di
from
Finanza,
the
il
General
generale
Commander
Zaffarana,
of the Italian
che è
Guardia di
all'estero
Finanza,
per
General
precedenti
Zaffarana,
impegni, e da
here to
parte
go
mia.
abroad
Un
for
sentito
institutional
ringraziamento
commitments.
al presidente
A
della
warm
Fondazione
thanks
Basso
to
per
the
aver voluto
President of
prevedere
Fondazione Basso
la presenza così
for
qualificata di un rappresentante del corpo a questa
inviting such an
importantissima iniziativa.
important
E
representative of
come si
the Guardia
diceva
di Finanza
prima,
to this
rientra nel
important
solco di una
initiative,
serie
one
di
that is
incontri, di
part
convegni
of a
per
series of
trattare un argomento
conferences
che
and
nel tempo
seminars
ha
to
assunto una
discuss
sempre maggiore
a
importanza,
topic
che è
which
quella
is
della
becoming
tutela degli interessi
increasingly
finanziari
important,
dell'Unione Europea.
that of the protection of the financial
La
interests
Guardia di
of
Finanza
the
è
Union.
sempre stata
The Guardia di
molto vicina
Finanza
a
was
questo
always
tipo di attività operativa.
very
E
receptive
ringrazio adesso
towards
subito
this
il dottor
operational
Platone per
activity.
riferimento che ha fatto
And
alla
I
nostra
wish to
recente storia.
thank Mr.
In
Platone
effetti,
for
la storia
mentioning
della
our
Guardia di
recent
Finanza
history.
ci
In
vede
fact,
nascere come polizia di
we were
confine,
created as a
quindi
border
soprattutto con un
police,
taglio di
so
carattere doganale,
it was
per
mainly
poi
customs
evolversi
that we had
alla metà degli anni
responsibility over.
70
And then
in
in the
polizia tributaria
mid-70s,
e
we
ai
became a
primissimi
taxation
anni
police.
del 2000
And
una
then in the
polizia
early
economico-finanziaria
2000s, we became a
che ha
police
tra
with
i suoi
responsibility
compiti
over the
primari la
economic and
tutela
financial sphere.
dei bilanci
Our
degli
primary
enti
responsibility
locali, del
is that
bilancio
of
nazionale e
protecting
appunto dell'Unione
the
Europea.
budgets of local authorities,
Questo
of the
specifico
national
compito
government, and
attribuito
of
per
the
legge
European
alla
Union.
Guardia di
This
Finanza
specific task
ha
that
permesso nel recentissimo passato
established for the Guardia di
la
Finanza by
valorizzazione dei
national law
rapporti con tutti gli
has
organismi europei a ciò
allowed
deputati.
us
In
to
primis, per
coordinate
quanto
in a course
riguarda
of
noi,
time with all
l'Europol, con
the
riferimento alla
relevant
parte di
European
polizia,
bodies.
e
On the
poi
one hand, first of
all'Olaf.
all,
Con l'Olaf
Europol,
c'è un
and then with
rapporto
Olaf.
strutturato da
With
tantissimi
Olaf,
anni
we have a
che ha permesso
consolidated
di avviare e
relationship
di
since
concludere
years
iniziative
now,
a
which
livello
allowed
comunitario
us to
assolutamente significative
carry
in
out
termini di
and
importanza,
successfully
sia a
conclude
fini di
initiatives
deterrenza che
at the
di repressione.
EU level that have been
Però
extremely
oggi siamo
effective,
qui,
both in
secondo
terms of
me,
prevention
a
and
trattare
in
un
terms of
momento
law
epocale
enforcement.
per quello che è
We
il
are here
contrasto
discussing this
agli
matter
interessi finanziari dell'Unione
in
Europea. Un
a
momento epocale
moment
per due
that is
motivi.
of historic
Primo,
importance
perché è
for the
divenuta
European Union when
operativa
it comes
la
to
figura
combating
EPO.
fraud, for
Era
two
un
reasons.
istituto
On the
che
one hand,
aspettavamo
because
a
the
livello
EPPO
comunitario da
is
tempo
now
e per
operative.
il quale
It is a
siamo
body that we have
assolutamente
all
sensibili
been
e
waiting
disponibili.
for at
Il
the EU
secondo
level,
motivo del
and
momento
we
epocale
are
è che, come
receptive
diceva prima il
towards its
vicepresidente Elmini,
operations
siamo
and
alla
ready to
vigilia
cooperate, of
di
course. We are
investimenti di
also
carattere
at
finanziario
the
come la storia
eve
recente non ha
of
mai visto. E quindi, da poliziotto competente nel settore economico,
fundings
mi
that
preoccupo
have
del
never been
rischio
allocated
di frodi
before
elevate sia per
in
numero
a
che
comparable
per
measure
importi.
in European history.
Per assolvere al nostro compito, quindi,
So,
mi
in
fa
order
piacere in questa
to
sede condividere con voi alcune
carry out
considerazioni.
our
La prima,
duties, I would
come
like
la Guardia
to
di Finanza è
share
strutturata
some
per
reflections with
far
you.
fronte a questo compito.
Number one, though,
Noi siamo
how are
strutturati
we organized as
sostanzialmente
a Guardia di
su
Finanza
due
in order to be up
livelli di
to this
operatività.
mission?
Da una
Well, we
parte
have
quelli che
two
definiamo
operational
i reparti
levels.
territoriali,
On the one
sono
hand,
quelli
what
che
we call
materialmente fanno le
the
indagini
local
iniziativa
offices, which are the ones that
su input
materially
delle
carry
procure
out
nazionali o
investigations
su input
on the basis of an
degli
input
organismi
coming
europei,
from
vedi
the
Olaf.
national judiciary
Domani,
or
oggi
from
anche
the
EPO,
European
aggiungiamo.
bodies.
Questo tipo
Such
di
as Olaf, and
attività
in the
il
future
corpo,
also EPPO.
considerata la particolare complessità delle iniziative
Given the
investigative,
particular
la
complexity
rafforza
of these
con il
investigations,
supporto
such
di quella
investigations
che
are
noi definiamo
reinforced
la
by the Guardia
componente
di
dei
Finanza
reparti speciali,
with the support of what
dei
we call
quali io
the
sono il
special
comandante.
offices
I reparti
that
speciali
I
della Guardia di
personally
Finanza
command.
si
In the Guardia
preoccupano
di Finanza, the
di
special offices
individuare quali sono i casi più
are
complessi
tasked with
e li
identifying
sviluppiamo
the
direttamente noi.
more
con
complex
riferimento
cases
alle
that we
frodi a
directly
danno degli interessi
cover.
finanziari, i reparti interessati
When it
sono
comes
due.
to
Si
fraud,
chiama
we
Nucleo
have
Speciale
two
Entrate,
offices
che ha
that are directly
competenza quindi
involved.
sulle
One
entrate anche al
is
bilancio
called
dell'Unione Europea, vedi IVA, frodi carosello,
Special
frodi IVA,
Revenues
e tutte le violazioni di
Team,
carattere
and the
doganale.
other is the
L'altro
Customs,
reparto è il Nucleo Speciale
and the
Spesa
other
Pubblica
is the
e Frodi Comunitarie. Ecco qua.
Special
Nella
Public
denominazione
Expenditure and EU
si
Frauds
individua la
Team.
specifica competenza.
So, as you can see
Questo
from the
reparto
name, specific
elabora i
responsibility
piani più
is
strutturati
identified.
sulla base
This
di quelli
team
che sono i flussi di
develops
erogazione, quindi
the
i
more
contributi
complicated
strutturali che vengono nel tempo
plans on
erogati.
the
Tutti gli
basis
interventi
of
di carattere
the
pubblico fa una
disbursement
serie di
flows
analisi a
and
fini di polizia
analyzes
ed
from a
individua i
police
target
perspective. This
più
flows
probabili sui
and
quali indirizza il
identifies
controllo.
the
L'obiettivo
targets
è quello di
that are
poter,
more
come accennavo
likely to
prima,
be the object
iniziare le nostre
of
attività
irregular
ispettive
activities.
nel minor tempo
So the
possibile
aim is that
rispetto al
of
momento
starting
della
the
erogazione
investigations
del
as quickly
contributo.
as
Perché
possible
come finanzieri
vis-a-vis the moment
la
in which
sfida che
the
abbiamo
funds are
raccolto è
dispersed.
stata quella
Because
di
as Guardia di
riuscire a
Finanza,
individuare
we
rapidamente
understood that
quanto
it is essential to
irregolarmente
promptly
ottenuto per poterlo recuperare e
identify
riportare nell'ambito dei bilanci dell'Unione Europea per un successivo
irregular
lecito
activity
reimpiego.
so that funding can be immediately
Però
brought back to
questo tipo
legitimate
di frodi
use within
ha una
the umbrella
caratteristica,
of
cioè le frodi
European
a danno
Union
del bilancio dell'Unione
interventions.
Europea
Now,
hanno
this type of
una
offense,
caratteristica,
fraud
è quella che
against
vedono
the
interessati
European budget,
soggetti
is a
in più stati
specific
membri
one
e quindi un
that
taglio
has the main
internazionale.
characteristics that of
Allora,
seeing the
come Guardia di
participation
Finanza
of more
abbiamo
perpetrators
adottato
in different
3
states,
scelte
so across
operative.
border
La prima,
nature. In order to come to
concentrare
terms with
in un
this,
reparto
we
a livello
have
centrale
taken
al
two
comando generale
decisions. Number one,
una cooperazione internazionale,
concentrating in a
perché
national
riteniamo che
team
la collaborazione
all the
internazionale
office concerning
meriti
international,
un'unica
all the
gestione,
efforts concerning
attesa la sua
international
particolarità e
cooperation.
delicatezza. Interfacciarsi con i diversi interlocutori
Because
esteri
international
impone
cooperation
una unicità di
efforts
comportamento.
require
Secondo,
an
abbiamo
harmonized
sviluppato una
strategy,
serie di intese
and we have
protocollari
one
con
office tasked with
moltissimi,
this. Number
soprattutto a
two,
livello europeo,
we have signed
nostri
multiple
partner
agreements
istituzionali, altre forze
with
di
our
polizia o
institutional
altri organismi
partners at the
europei.
European
Ricordo
level,
Europol,
other police
Olaf.
forces or European
Terzo,
bodies, Europol,
abbiamo avviato
Olaf. Number
e
three,
dislocato nei paesi di maggiore interesse
in the
a fini
countries
Guardia
of
di
greater
Finanza degli
interest,
ufficiali di collegamento. Quindi abbiamo
we
nostri referenti
have
direttamente
sent
all'estero
some
che
liaison
possono
officers.
curare
So we
lo
have
sviluppo
our
dei casi più
direct
complessi.
members of the Guardia di Finanza who are
Tutta
abroad
quanta questa
and can work with us on the
organizzazione
most complex cases.
noi la
This entire
mettiamo a
structure
disposizione per
is
prevenire e reprimere le
something
frodi a danno dell'Unione
that
Europea.
functions in order to
E lo facciamo
prevent
con
and
un riconoscimento
prosecute frauds
di
against the
poteri
interests of the
investigativi
Union,
che
and we do
la
so
normativa
on the
nazionale ci
basis
riconosce.
of the investigative
E lo
powers
facciamo con
given
delle
to us
risorse umane e
by national
finanziarie
legislation,
per
and we do
dotare
so
di mezzi
through
per sviluppare
financial
queste
resources and human
attività.
resources so that
Ma
these
io qui
activities can
voglio
be
condividere con
correctly
voi una
implemented.
considerazione.
There is
È che questo
a
tipo di
consideration I
frode
would like to share with
impone
you.
una specifica
This type of
mentalità
fraud
operativa
requires a
perché
specific
possano essere contrastate
operational
al meglio,
mindset
perché si
in
basa la
order
mentalità operativa
for law
sul
enforcement
controllo
to
documentale
correctly happen,
di
because
fatture, di bilanci,
it
di documenti,
requires
di percorsi
an
previsti
activity
che permettono
of
di rilevare
surveillance
l'irregolarità.
over the
Questo
flows of
è il know-how
documents
della
and the
Guardia di
flows of
Finanza,
records
che noi con senso del dovere e istituzionale mettiamo a disposizione di EPPO delle altre strutture europee per sviluppare un'azione di contrasto alle frodi sempre più completa e concreta, consapevoli che per il motivo che accennavamo prima e che ha richiamato anche prima il vicepresidente Ermini, e cioè della grande mole di investimenti a brevissimo tempo, sarà necessaria una grande sinergia tra tutti gli enti chiamati a questo, EPO, l'Europol, l'Olaf, la Guardia di Finanza e gli altri enti interessati. Con questo messaggio di disponibilità del corpo alla massima efficienza nel contrastare queste frodi, io vi ringrazio per l'attenzione e auguro buon lavoro. Grazie.
Siamo noi a ringraziare lei, Generale Cuneo.
Thank you, General Cuneo. Your presentation, like the previous presentations, was a very effective and relevant one. We, as Fondazione Basso, have always taken an interest in such themes. We see that there has been possible to make a leap forward, and we have to work on this major achievements. I think we have to now move from a cognitive stage. What is EPPO? How did it come into being? How is it being structured? And the various controversies which existed at the time. We are a body of the European Union that wants to have a prosecuting policy. So we now have to move to the operational stage. We have to make the best possible use of this tool, EPPO, using the expertise and the capabilities available in Italy. So thanks to a number of judicial offices that have been doing great work and the crucial contribution from Guardia di Finanza. At the end of this session with the opening addresses, I'd like to give the floor to Franco Ippolito, who is the president of Fondazione Basso. Good morning, everyone. As the convener of this conference, I'd like to thank you all, and I'd like to especially thank the European Chief Prosecutor, Laura Cavesi, the Vice President of the Higher Council of the Judiciary, the Commander of the Special Units of the Guardia di Finanza, General Cuneo. I'd like to thank all rapporteurs and speakers who have been accompanying us and following us in analyzing and trying to understand these themes. And I'd like to thank the collaborators from the Fondazione, Secretary General Dr. Capellini, and our wonderful collaborators Severina Manna, Silvia Cosma, who are at the heart of this of the foundation and the driving force of the foundation. This conference follows the 3 workshops that we have organized in 2013, 2015, and 2018 that focused on the establishment of this new institution, the European Public Prosecutor's Office. So we have sort of heard and discussed many themes related to its establishment. This was a lengthy process which was sometimes delayed by differences of opinion and nationalist resistance to that. The need to achieve the largest possible measure of consensus in member countries resulted into having to accept some of the demands put forward by some countries, which changed the initial proposal from the Commission and did not take on board the recommendations of the European Parliament. We've got to be very clear about that. Not all solutions that have been adopted were in keeping with our wishes. That is why I mentioned that we've gone through a process which was not an easy process, and there were difficulties that we tried to overcome. So, but we want to reiterate the opinion which was expressed by Elena Pacciotti, whom I wish to greet here, in the most recent conference, which fought to ensure that the Fondazione would be involved in this process very strongly. So, and I quote Elena Pacciotti, despite some problems which we had to sort of iron out in the course of time, this effort has led to sort of an innovation in the institutional landscape of Europe, unprecedented at worldwide level. The establishment of prosecuting body, supranational body, which is responsible to prosecute the criminals that sort of harm the financial interest of the Union. As Patrone said, well, the financial interests are the interests of the European citizens, to ensure that the enormous amount of money which is being allocated to face up to the pandemic be used timely, in a timely manner, in an effective manner for the common interest. So the European Public Prosecutor's Office is a positive and crucial innovation, not just because of its inherent value of this body, which will represent a very effective instrument to protect the interest of the Union, but also because it does enrich the landscape of institutions which are potentially designed to increase and enhance further the thrust towards a more united Europe. In the following session, there will be specialists talking about specific issues, solutions and perspective, and we will follow with great interest their analysis. So they will share with us their insight, their suggestions and proposals for a way forward. We are at sort of the initial stage. We've heard from the Chief Prosecutor Cavesi about the commitment undertaken by the EPPO in the early months of its functioning. Well, there will be problems of coordination, will be a number of other issues that will have to be ironed out. So our speakers will share with us their expertise and their knowledge about these issues. In this opening session, however, let me make a sort of a general consideration of for an institutional policy, tensions and conflicts between the various rationales which exist in the Union. The rationale or logic, which is based on intergovernmental approach, as opposed to the union, the pro-union logic. Well, this sometimes does not enable us to meet the expectations of citizens. We feel that the European Union is capable of meeting the aspirations of its citizens, fulfilling the tasks laid down in the treaties, according to the principles laid down in the treaties, in the sectors which are entrusted to the decision of its institutions of a federal nature: Parliament, the Commission, the Court of Justice, the Central Bank, European Central Bank. Whilst the Union is somewhat limited when decisions depend on the agreement of all governments represented in the Council, and this is especially true if we look at examples such as migration policies. Well, our wish is the following: after we will overcome the obstacles that have delayed the establishment of EPPO, we hope that European Public Prosecutor Office will be capable for the very inherent nature and its task to help us pursue its task and contribute to the enhancement and strengthening of the pro-union policy as opposed to the intergovernmental approach. I think that all the EU institutions will benefit from that, and all the European citizens and European residents will benefit from it. Thank you. So we'll have a short break. We'll have to change a panel, and a coffee break will be after this first session, according to the program.
Pensate che possiamo iniziare la sessione? Siamo in gran parte a distanza oggi con due.
Today, we have 2 of the 3 speakers in remote. So the head table is available for the 2 of us, myself and Dr. Bianchi. I'd like to thank the Fondazione Basso, not just for its invitation after the earlier opportunity, but for the efforts that they have deployed in discussing about this theme, which is the important theme for the European Union, as was pointed out in the various opening addresses. This is a symptom of the vertical dimension of the process of the European Union, a process which is very important despite the nationalist thrust. It is very important that we were able to come up with something which is highly important sort of legal and political institutions. I'd like to mention the closing words given by Francesca Ruggiero, which was then published in a small book. Francesca Ruggeri said that there should be a reflection on the legal and cultural impact that the European Prosecutor's Office has in sort of enhancing the guarantees which are the founding core of the European Union as laid down in Article 2. And it would appear that this wish that she has expressed has been met fully. So in opening this working session on the institutional structure, which is protecting the financial interest of the Union, we have to bear in mind this aspect to give value to the values of the persons and the guarantees that must be provided to individuals. So I first wrote an essay on the funding of institutional bodies, and a chapter on the resources of the Union is a chapter which has been fully emphasized because of the emphasis which is being placed on this system of funding as a possibility of guaranteeing the autonomy. I'd like to ask the President of the Committee of the European Parliament, Monica Holmeyer, to take the floor.
So thank you very much. I didn't hear everything, but I hope that you can hear me and that you invited me at the moment, as I understood it, to speak to you, because in the last 15 seconds, there were some interruptions in between. So I'm very thankful that I have the opportunity to speak to you in this International Anti-Fraud Conference. And I'm very happy that you really invited very important persons in the European Union. One I'm seeing, Ernesto Bianchi, because he's really one of the specialists in the area and is really very helpful in our budgetary control committee. If we would like to get a better insight in the area of fraud or of corruption, I'm happy that you have Laura Kövesi with you, that Fabrizio Cuneo is with you, David Ermini, and especially my colleague Katarina Kinichi, a well-appreciated colleague and very knowledgeable colleague. And thank you very much to Franco Ippolito, President of Fondazione Basso, to organize it with you together. First, as introduction, every year fraud, corruption and the misuse of funds cause losses amounting to billions of euros for the EU and national budgets. Yesterday we had a debate in the plenary about the new Pandora revelations. That's now the third time after already the Panama cases, the LuxLeaks cases, now it's Pandora cases. So repeatedly, every 6 months or every year, we have a new kind of leak. And behind these kind of leaks, we always find billions of fraud, not only millions of fraud. When I listened in the last time to Laura Kövesi, already the first cases that are on the table of EPO amount to more than 4 billion. So this this already shows the impact of fraud on our EU budget, but also on the national budgets, and explicitly the unfair treatment of normal taxpayer who is paying his taxes or her taxes, and at the end, fraudsters have the chance to win billions when we are discussing, for example, cases of €1,000, €2,000 of normal taxpayers. So our focus must be the one to really stop the big fraud. The fraud is going around the world in different areas and in different kind of ways. The Commission aims to address existing shortcomings in the EU's response to fraud with its 2019 Commission Anti-Fraud Strategy. As first speaker of this panel, I would like to briefly outline the strategy's content. I will then address several threats towards Union's financial interest and outline solutions or possible solutions to the prevailing problems. First, the Commission Anti-Fraud Strategy is an internal policy document for the Commission. It is binding on the Commission services and executive agencies and sets the framework for their fight against fraud affecting the EU's financial interests. This 2019 Commission Anti-Fraud Strategy represents a revised version of the 2011 strategy and was developed in preparation of the multi-annual financial framework 2021 to 2027. It also incorporates two significant novelties in the EU anti-fraud framework, namely the adoption of the PIF directive and the establishment of EPO. The Commission Anti-Fraud Strategy defines 7 objectives for the fight against fraud. 2 of them are priority objectives, which the Commission particularly focuses on. The first priority objective, data collection and analysis. The Commission aims to better collect and analyze data on fraud from sources such as Commission audits and databases. OLAF investigations, look at Ernesto Bianchi, and the Irregularity Management System, IMS system shortly called. Through this analysis, it wants to sharpen its understanding of fraud patterns, fraudsters' profiles, and systemic vulnerabilities related to fraud affecting the EU budget. This includes artificial intelligence methodologies, and I hope that the European Parliament in their discussions understands that we need artificial intelligence. Secondly, the second priority objective is coordination, cooperation, and processes. Here, the Commission wants to optimize the coordination, the cooperation, and workflows among Commission services and executive agencies involved in the fight against fraud. To realize these objectives, the Commission developed an action plan consisting of 63 actions. Commission services and executive agencies will take. As of June 2021, 2/3 of these actions had already been implemented, but there are still gaps. Finally, it is important to note that the Commission anti-fraud strategy does not directly address the member states. While the Commission encourages them to take certain actions for protecting the Union financial interest throughout the strategy itself is not binding for them, but this is already the problem. May I be frank, we need member states all together to act and not to discuss or to even hamper certain kind of procedures. This leads to problems in the strategy's practical implementation. The Commission supports member states in developing national anti-fraud strategies, but in practice, 13 member states have not yet developed even a kind of strategy. And several existing strategies need to be updated. Let me be frank, most of the member states have a lot of loopholes. The Commission further supports member states in transposing and implementing the PIF directive. But while all member states have by now transposed the directive, conformity issues on several central components remain. These shortcomings show that the Commission anti-fraud strategy, at least in its current form, cannot be the sole answer to tackling the practical issues in fighting fraud throughout the Union. I would now like to highlight some of the significant practical problems the EU faces in its fight against fraud and outline solutions for these issues. These solutions are complementary to the measures set forth in the Commission anti-fraud strategy and represent crucial additional steps we must take to safeguard our finances from fraud, corruption, and misuse. The first issue I want to address regards the lack of transparency in the EU funding. When providing subsidies, the entities responsible for monitoring, auditing, and scrutinizing the EU budget must be aware of who receives which amount of funds. This concerns EU-level entities like the Commission, the Parliament, and the Cont Committee, the ECA, OLAF, EPO, Europol, Eurojust, but also national authorities and parliaments. Knowledge about the recipients of EU funds is a precondition for ensuring that subsidies do not end up in the hands of fraudsters, criminal organizations, oligarchs, politicians in conflict of interest, or dubious financial investors. Nevertheless, my experience in the Cont Committee has shown that information on the beneficiaries of EU subsidies is not readily available or not available at all. For the CAP, we needed around about 1.5 years to get a kind of knowledge, let's say it like this, who are the recipients. Under our mandate to scrutinize the EU budget, we inquired information about the 50 largest beneficiaries of CAP and cohesion funds from the Commission. Importantly, we wanted to know who the direct as well as the final beneficiaries were, including the natural persons who are the beneficial owners of companies receiving funds, both at country and EU level. Regrettably, the Commission was unable to provide us with an aggregated list of the 50 largest beneficiaries of CAP and of cohesion policy. Albeit the national authorities implementing CAP and cohesion policy collect and publish data on the direct recipients, this data is not aggregated to generate a complete picture of who receives which amount throughout the Union. Instead, data is scattered across 290 databases. It is frequently stored in formats that makes the extraction of information extremely difficult. It is not machine readable or even not automated and cannot be aggregated. And recipients are not equipped with a unique identifier that allows tracing them across different member states. What is more, databases only display the direct beneficiaries of EU funds and do not automatically link this information to underlying ownership structures. And to give you one example, now we will have a new analysis on 2 member states because of our study and because of the audit of the Commission. We revealed now that in 2 further member states, there is a huge concentration of subsidies on certain groups of persons. Furthermore, to obtain an answer to our questions, we had to commission a study in which researchers manually extracted and aggregated the necessary information to the degree this was possible, an arduous task and a sad commentary in the age of digitalization. This example underlines that transparency in the use of EU funds is extremely poor. Neither Parliament nor the Commission nor the national authorities auditing CAP and cohesion funds are fully aware of where EU funds finally end up. This significant lack of transparency creates fertile ground for fraud, corruption, misuse and exploitation by criminal organizations. Complicated and unclear structures for implementing and monitoring funds are another enabler for fraud. The harm such structures can cause was recently illustrated in the Danube Delta in Romania. The Danube Delta is a UNESCO World Heritage Site suffering from high levels of poverty and low economic development. To help the region develop and protect its unique environment, the EU set up the Integrated Territorial Investment Danube Delta, ITI-DD, worth €1.1 billion. A team of investigative journalists uncovered that the majority of this money, clearly said 93%, this money never reached its intended purpose. Only 16% of 1,880 projects implemented under ITI were located in the Delta itself. The rest was already outside of the Delta or went explicitly directly after the project start to leave the Delta. What is more, oversight of ITI-DD was split between 3 Romanian ministries, which led to an implementation without clear oversight and lines of reporting. This allowed local politicians to abuse the fund and distribute millions amongst themselves, their family and their friends. ITI Danube Delta is a blatant illustration of the harm complicated funding schemes with unclear oversight structures can cause. The Commission never noticed what was going on. Only the perseverance of investigative journalists ultimately led to the suspension of payments to ITI-DD. Next case. These cases illustrated that substantial threats to the integrity of the EU's financial system exist. The pressing question is what we can do about it. Part of the answer lies in a third case, which I am certain many of you are familiar with. What became known as the false Pharma case describes an elaborate fraud scheme set up by mafia-type organizations in Sicily. Criminals influenced the Italian agricultural paying agency, AGEA, to obtain information on plots eligible for agricultural support that were not claimed by anyone. They then submitted claims for support for these plots under the names of deceased owners or companies they held power over. Despite the fact that these were not related to farming at all, this elaborate scheme allowed them to abuse millions of euros meant to support Sicilian farmers. What I want to highlight about the scheme was how it was finally uncovered. Italian authorities created interoperability between the databases of the Italian Ministry of Finance, recording the beneficiaries of agricultural funds the paying agency responsible for controlling the use of agricultural funds, the Italian registry, and the database storing declarations of interest. This high level of cooperation between Italian authorities enabled the paying agency to spot millions of small fraud cases that added up to the significant fraud committed by organized crime groups. The Italian government made this interoperability between databases mandatory in its national anti-fraud strategy, and the benefits of this measure are evident. An important step to fighting fraud affecting the EU budget is therefore the creation of interoperability across national as well as between national and EU level databases. In its anti-fraud strategy, the Commission aims to increase the interoperability between its IT tools across management modes and Commission services. This is surely the right step, but it is not enough. As stated before, the Commission anti-fraud strategy is not binding on the member states. As such, it cannot make interoperability in national systems mandatory. But an action the Commission anti-fraud strategy does foresee is supporting the member states in creating robust national anti-fraud strategies in which member states can make the interoperability of national databases mandatory. The Commission has to demonstrate to member states the evident advantages of best practices national strategies like the Italian one. In this regard, I welcome Olaf's initiative of organizing a conference with member states representatives in which good practices for national anti-fraud policies will be exchanged. Furthermore, I think that we have to change our financial regulation to guarantee an obligatory interoperability and exchange of data between national and EU level. Dialogue must surely be the first step the Commission takes in order to promote the advantages of an interoperable IT system, but it is not enough. Ultimately, the goal must be to enshrine the creation of an interoperable IT system in EU legislation. The European Parliament supported this approach in the negotiations on the Common Provisions Regulation and the new CAP. It foresaw making the use of Arachne risk scoring tool mandatory for member states as a first step in creating an interoperable IT system. But even this first step was blocked by the member states. This shows that Parliament and the Commission are facing a long way forward in which they must work together in order to overcome member states' reluctance and create the interoperable system from which our union fight against fraud would so greatly benefit. We must furthermore ensure that the available information on fraud affecting the EU budget is exchanged among all relevant actors. This concerns national bodies like financial intelligence units or national prosecutors and EU-level bodies like OLAF, EPO, Commission Services, or Eurojust, or Europol. National bodies operate under different legislation across member states, and their methods for displaying information are often not harmonized. This slows down the pace at which information is transmitted and processed, and is a serious impediment for assessing EU-level threats. The Commission should promote stronger harmonization in the display of information, as well as close cooperation between national and EU-level bodies. The benefits of a timely information exchange between national and EU-level bodies became evident in the context of the COVID crisis. Fraudsters addressed fake vaccines offers to several member states. Since national authorities reported these suspicious offers to Olaf, Olaf was able to assess the EU-wide situation and recognize the large-scale fraud pattern. In turn, Olaf was able to warn all member states about the emerging threat and prevent them from falling for the fake offers. Such cooperation between national and EU-level bodies is not the norm, but it should serve as a guiding principle for the level of cooperation we are aiming for. This is also a call on Olaf to increase the frequency of conducting this kind of EU-level analysis and provide its findings to national and EU-level authorities. So now, last and finally, in order to strengthen the EU's response to fraud, we must also ensure that clear structures for monitoring and auditing the implementation of the EU budget are in place. An unclear chain of command enables fraudsters to systematically abuse EU funds, as became evident in the Danube Delta case. The Commission must therefore ensure that robust monitoring structures exist in the Member States before paying out funds and continuously verify their suitability for carrying out their task. This is more important than ever in the context of NGEU. Finally, the EU must ensure that its bodies responsible for fighting fraud are equipped with sufficient human, financial, and technical resources. Now, I really address it to the member states. Every year since 11 years in the conciliation of budget, and every year we are discussing staff, equipment plans, and financial means. And every year, may I be quite frank, that all the institutions that are able to guarantee our financial stability and our financial seriosity don't receive enough staff and enough money. So I really ask the member states to agree on more staff for EPO, for OLAF, for Eurojust, and for Europol, because we see a lot of cases that are not dealt in a way how they should be dealt, and explicitly the cross-border cases need to be better addressed. The Commission must ensure that it not only drafts anti-fraud strategies that are good on paper, but that it equips, together with the member states, its services and executive agencies with the necessary resources to translate the Commission's strategy into practice. Today, I have now highlighted several steps. I thank you very much for this conference, and I tried to highlight a little bit the problem, so thank you very much.
Thank Mrs. President, thank Monica for your speech and very interesting contents. You stressed the enforcement of the new European anti-fraud strategy and the building of a better capacity to detect and analyze data and information on fraud. It is a strategy, you said, founded on the will of all the actors involved in it. Important legal framework are a strong instrument to reinforce this strategy. And I remember here the two regulations, 241/2021 on the facility plan, and the regulation 2020/2092 on the general regime of conditionality. So it is a strategy, you said, that would be useful only if all the bodies, both domestic and international, European, will strongly collaborate. Now we move to the next speaker. Presentiamo il dottor Ernesto Bianchi, direttore delle indagini doganali, del contrabbando e delle indagini internazionali. E credo che questo approfondimento della struttura amministrativa che l'Unione Europea ha predisposto a protezione del bene comune bilancio europeo avrà un grande vantaggio nella nostra conoscenza di questa strategia, dal momento che proprio l'Olaf è uno dei pezzi portanti di questa strategia, anche sulla base del nuovo regolamento appena deliberato. Credo che il dottor Bianchi, per facilitare il dibattito, vorrà parlare in lingua inglese, di questo lo ringrazio. A lei la parola, dottor.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Let me begin by thanking the Basso Foundation for this very important initiative at a crucial point in time. I bring to you also the greetings and the apologies of my Director General, Mr. Ville Itzela, who could not be here with us today because of a previous urgent commitment that has come up lately. In their opening statements this morning, we heard from the speakers how the picture ahead of us is very clear, and Mrs. Hohlmeier just painted exactly the same picture. If we want to achieve the policy objectives of the European Union, if we want to bounce out of the deep crisis in which the COVID pandemic has plunged Europe, if we want to avoid that criminals steal public money and use it for their illicit and illegal purposes, we have to work together, and we have a lot of work to do. And this is why our masters have revamped the EU architecture to protect the EU budget, with it the interest, the financial interest of the European Union. And with this, sometimes when I speak to my friends and to my family and I explain what I do, they tell me, what is the financial interest? And I think we've heard this morning how this is not just the budget that we are protecting. We are protecting people, we are protecting jobs, the economy, health, safety, all things that are very relevant for all of us every day, and for our children. The changes that we've witnessed over the last couple of years on the EU anti-fraud architecture are significant. They are ambitious. Their implementation requires building trust, requires building new systems and new ways of working together to address challenges that we have already identified and new ones that will be coming for sure. The EU level architecture that we are talking about today, and this is a very important message that I really want to leave you with, is the top of this, really the tip of the iceberg, is what emerges, is what we see when we have this kind of discussions and reflections together. But underneath, there is the iceberg. The iceberg is the many, the countless managing authorities, control bodies, auditors, enforcement officers, administrative offices in the member states that are in the first line in protecting the EU budget from fraud. And while we, of course, focus on the European dimension, we never, ever, ever have to forget what's underneath the water, which is the bulk of the weaponry that we have and that we can deploy against fraudsters and criminals. In this first session, we are talking about anti-fraud strategies, and it's only logical that we begin from the beginning, so from the anti-fraud strategy. What is an anti-fraud strategy? It's a set of tools that are used to prevent fraud and irregularities, to prevent, also to detect. That's the first line of deterrence, that's the first line of defense that we have. As Monica Hohlmeier said, the 2019 anti-fraud strategy of the Commission, we call it CAFS to shorten it, we love acronyms in Brussels, is the second such strategy that the Commission adopted, and it did so to respond to calls from the European Court of Auditors that examined what we had put in place in 2011 and saw that we had two structural weaknesses. One is data. Again, Monica Hohlmeier said it so well before me. There's a lot of data out there. Are the data connected? Do we use the data? Do we have the data that we need? Big questions that we needed to address inside the Commission. So again, I'm in a tip of the iceberg. I'm in a section of the tip of the iceberg there. And the other one is to make sure that the Commission is a very large organization that copes with very large and very different challenges, that the Commission coordinates its work and acts as one single body with a brain in facing fraud. And of course, the central role that Olaf plays in that context. As I said, the European Commission has to manage a complex structure of expenditure models. We have what we call direct management. That's when Commission departments are responsible for spending the money directly. And this is the reality for some of the EU funds, not many. The majority of EU funds are actually managed jointly. That's why I mentioned the iceberg with the authorities of the member states under the coordination of different Commission departments. And now the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, has introduced a novel way of spending, which is a weird form of direct management with a shared management touch. But we'll perhaps mention and talk about this more in detail in the coming sessions. Now, putting all this together is really important because fraudsters, and we've learned this in the 20 years of existence of Olaf, are really impressive. They're very, very good at mapping situations that they can exploit to their advantage. They use, and they have used, situations of emergency and urgency. That's where procedures get lighter. So that's where controls are thinner because of the urgency. We all remember COVID. Large amounts are, of course, and that's the situation that we have today with this unprecedented amount of money that is all of a sudden going to be available for spending. And with that, the new procedures that the RRF brings with it, the member states are still reflecting, still fine-tuning the control systems that they will be using to oversee the expenditure of so much money, 800 billion euro over 2-3 years, essentially. So that's a huge challenge. Polycriminality has come in as well. We now have more and more and more infiltration by organized crime into what used to be administrative irregularities. So it's very hard to detect, very hard to reconstruct the bigger picture. And again, Monica Hohlmeier said it before me, so I won't repeat it there. The truth is that when knowledge, when best practice do not flow, that's a huge gift for fraudsters. And we have to do something about that. Now, the 2019 CAFS, so anti-fraud strategy, aims essentially at doing two things, as I said. The first one is on data collection and analysis. And I would like to highlight basically the improvements that we've made since 2019 in implementing this new strategy. Olaf has reinforced its analytical work quite significantly by widening the sources that we use. So we've obtained access to more of that data, more databases. But of course, having data does not necessarily mean using data. So of course, we've done work on using data as well. We have, in particular, developed what we call strategic analysis and operational analysis. Strategic analysis is the type of analysis that we carry out to look at the past, to derive lessons for the future. That's where you look at trends. That's where you map ways in which fraudsters have perpetrated their fraud schemes, so that this is not repeated. Fraudsters have this particular gift at moving their fraud schemes around from one member state to the other, and cruelly also sometimes from one region of a member state to another region. They can do that because locally their fraud schemes are not known, are not detectable, because they're part of a bigger picture. And this is something that we will be doing more and more. We've recently done one on health infrastructure, which has been infiltrated quite a lot by fraudsters and organized crimes in the last year, and that we see as, of course, a big factor of of attraction for fraud at the point in time in which money is made available to build resilience and to improve our health systems. We've also improved our capacity for data mining and the use of artificial intelligence to process large amounts of data in administrative databases. Sometimes it's a sea of data. I see this with customs every day. We are talking about analysis of millions of tiny transactions every day. And it is really important to derive, to know where to look and what to look for. Otherwise, it's impossible to do any work at all. So we have improved our understanding of fraud patterns. We are profiling fraudsters as well, and we're trying to look for their systemic vulnerabilities because they have them. They study us, we study them. We've reinforced, as I said, also our operational analytical capacity, and that is something that we did, and we showed really the value of that on our work on fake and substandard face masks. You remember, and the fake offers of vaccines that you will certainly remember from the first part of the year. We were fast, we were there, but it was not easy. We did it, but it was really a lot of work. And just to give you a couple of examples that we saw, these fraudsters operate essentially by artificially multiplying the chains of intermediaries that they use. So you have a fake company that sells to a fake company that sells to a fake company that sells to a fake company. And none of these companies are in the same member state, of course. They are in different member states, and they are in third countries too. So the reconstructing all of that chain is not simple. Another situation that we saw is that, of course, some of these entities that really don't look linked to one another in reality are. And I'm coming back to the point on transparency that Monica Hohlmeier was making earlier. Sometimes we really saw that behind 80 companies, we had the same individuals operating behind them, and reconstructing them is really important, and making sure that that mapping is available in all member states to stop these individuals from operating by using so many shields, so many different fake companies. So we do this around the clock, and when we're good, we manage to anticipate. We manage to really do prevention, which is not deterring, it's just preventing, it's blocking the flow of goods into Europe. It is blocking the flow of dangerous substances that harm us, our health and safety, that harm the environment. Intelligence. Intelligence is not just data, it's digested data. Is signs, warnings, really more material work. And we need to put together the different type of intelligence that we have in Europe today, but also inside each member state. We have, just to give you examples, we have criminal intelligence, we have a situational threat intelligence, we have border intelligence, we have administrative intelligence, with customs intelligence. Well, all of that needs to be brought together. Until we get good enough and we get to bring it all together, we're leaving space for fraud. And we've already begun doing quite a lot of work with Europol and Frontex on this front. Away from data now onto coordination. I mentioned that the second key achievement of the 2019 CAFs is the progress that we made on monitoring. Monitoring sounds like a boring thing, but no, it isn't. And that's the monitoring of what happened with the financial recommendations that Olaf made over the years. In 2020, we took stock of about 1,400 financial recommendations issued since 2012. And we reviewed the outcome of that with the relevant Commission department. So what was recovered, what was not recovered, and why What happened? Did we get it wrong? Did somebody else get it wrong? Were there difficulties? Is there something that we didn't see? And again, this is not just important because we need to measure the impact of what we do. It is also important because sometimes we have, and we see already, we have some fraud schemes that are designed in a way that recovery will automatically fail. And we have to be even more careful with those situations and map them beforehand and take action. Now, looking ahead, looking at what the future brings us, I'd like to go back to the image, to that image of the iceberg. Monica Hohlmeier said it. The CAFs 2019 is all about Brussels. What about the rest? What about the rest of the iceberg? Do they get a CAFs? Now, some member states were inspired by what we did in the Commission, and they have adopted anti-fraud strategies at national level. So that's a step, but it's not all of them. It's a few of them. Some are thinking, some are doing. I think the numbers, if I'm not wrong, are 15 have it now, and 6 are in the process of having having an anti-fraud strategy, of thinking about it. The nature of our fraud here is cross-border. So again, we need to think about the effectiveness of potentially 27 different and coordinated national strategies. That what we want? So that's a big open question for us today. And the enormity of the challenge is really going to be made visible in the coming months by the implementation, when the member states implement Next Generation EU. Next Generation EU is a lot of money that needs to be spent fast on priorities and on emergencies. National and regional, sometimes regional, in this country it's regional, authorities that work on management, control, administration, enforcement are all key players in the fight against fraud. And in a way, they're faced with the same challenges that the Commission had and that the Commission mapped in its CAFs 2019 strategy. Again, lots of data, lots of non-interoperable data, as Monica Hohlmeier was saying, lots of actors on the stage, but the choreography is not always the choreography that we'd like to see, or certainly there's fraudsters looking at the show to see where the sink is failing, and that's where they're going to go. We have a number of digital tools in place already now to fight fraud, like Arachne. Arachne is not compulsory for the implementation of the RRF, though. We have EDIS for early detection and for exclusion. We have IMS for keeping track of irregularities and fraud. Again, IMS not compulsory in the context of the RRF. So we need to improve these tools. We need to make sure that in a way we accompany the process, that we do not leave and we do not forget the bottom of the iceberg, which is the iceberg really, and we leave the regional and national bodies alone with this monumental task that we cannot fail politically. So as the national RRF plans now turn into reality, Olaf will continue to work alongside to accompany this process. We've been there from the very beginning. We've been participating in the drafting of the Commission proposal. We've been participating in the negotiations in the Council and in the Parliament. We've been sitting at the table when the Commission departments were meeting with the with the member states to talk about the RRF plans, particularly, of course, the control and audit chapter that is so important. Now, that is something that we've done. We'll continue doing that. We are in the process of doing that now. But as we move to implementation, we do not want to leave regional and national bodies on their own. So we'll try to do what we can, but there's 350 people in Olaf, so we do what we can to work as a connector a connector of good practice, a connector of training, a connector in detecting and analyzing fraud patterns by using to the maximum the possibilities offered by the database that we've access to. We see the data for basically Europe, the whole of Europe. So that's certainly an interest point of view. And then while we do this, we need to, as I said, continue working also on the very top of the iceberg, and we need to make sure that we do more, and that was a bit the spirit of the conference on law enforcement that took place here in Rome a couple of weeks ago. We need to work at strengthening our capacity to bring together the different types of data analysis and intelligence, particularly intelligence that we have in other parts of the enforcement bodies of the European Union. So we have already opened and we are improving cooperation on the ground, also with other European anti-fraud bodies, EPO in the first place, of course, but Eurojust, Europol, Frontex, the European Parliament, and the European Court of Auditors. It's a big challenge, but we are going to put all we have into making sure that that happens. I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the rest of the discussion today. Thank you.
Olaf as a connector is a very good representation of the mission of Olaf. Thanks so much, Mr. Bianchi. You opened your speech with a very important message. It is true, the protection of the financial interests of the European Union is really the protection of the citizens' interest. Thus, different perspective permits to appreciate the development of a different strategy after the ratification of the Lisbon Treaty. European Union is in an intergovernmental organization, but it is not only for state, but also for individuals. And these last protagonists have to be more and more protected in parallel with the growing of the integration process. Il dottor Bianchi ci ha anche ricordato la capacità di infiltrazione della criminalità organizzata o non, e così come ce l'aveva ricordato il comandante generale della Guardia di Finanza Cuneo. E ha parlato del fatto che ogni mancanza di collaborazione si traduce in un regalo, in a gift per la criminalità. E ha messo in luce ciò che, se non ben governato, potrebbe essere un elemento di complessità nel rapporto fra la struttura della Procura europea e la struttura amministrativa dell'Unione Europea. Lo sappiamo bene noi in Italia, la distinzione fra prevenzione e repressione deve essere tenuta ferma se non si vogliono confusioni di ruolo. E dal discorso di Ernesto Bianchi è emerso chiaramente la natura squisitamente amministrativa delle attività che svolge ALA, quindi la prospettiva amministrativa della vigilanza tramite le competenze espresse da quest'organo. Grazie mille veramente, è stata una interessante lezione per me. Ora we move to Marta Laszczuk, avvocato del servizio legale della Corte dei Conti europea. Grazie all'intervento di Marta noi potremo apprezzare un'altra tessera di questo importante mosaico della competenza amministrativa dell'Unione nel proteggere gli interessi finanziari dell'Unione, ovvero gli interessi dei cittadini. Marta, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope that you can hear me. I'm participating remotely. Unfortunately, Mr. Christophe Le Sauvage, head of the legal service of the court, could not be here today with you. He apologizes sincerely for this. In my capacity of a member of the legal service, I was asked to step in and to present the role of our institution in fighting fraud against the EU financial interests, as well as our cooperation with our main partners, namely Olaf and EPO. So my presentation will be more operational, but as Mr. Bianchi said, at the end of the day, how we cooperate is crucial. Let me try to take control of my short PowerPoint presentation. I will start, sorry. I will try to share this. All right. If everything is fine, you should be able to see it. Okay. Okay. Let me start by saying that the awareness and recognition of the court's significant role in preventing and detecting fraud is growing among citizens and political leaders. The European Parliament calls on the court to continuously include fraud-related factors in its audit samples. In its conclusions on the Next Generation EU, the European Council noted that combating fraud requires a strong involvement of the Court of Auditors in cooperation with other partners. In its strategy for the coming years, the court declared its firm intention to contribute to combating fraud. Dealing with suspected fraud, and it is important to underline this, is not simply an operational issue for the court, it is a matter of our strategy. I'm afraid that the slides are not working. Let me try it again. Right. From a purely legal perspective, as you know, it results from the relevant treaty provisions that the court can intervene only at the very beginning of the anti-fraud cycle. By carrying out the Union's independent and external audit, we contribute to the prevention and detection of fraud. So the court acts as a watchdog or a guardian of EU finances. The very risk of an independent and external audit deters fraudsters, or at least renders their operations more difficult. We also contribute to prevention through our advisory opinions on legislative proposals. For instance, we issued opinions on the PIF directive, on the most recent amendments to the Olaf regulation, and on the EU anti-fraud program. On detection and reporting, the court detects potential fraud in the course of its audit work or on the basis of denunciations from third parties. Once a potential case is detected, we are obliged to forward that case to Olaf or the EPO, depending, of course, on their respective competence. We are also obliged to act without any undue delay. As you can see, we have no role whatsoever in further investigations and judicial proceedings. So if we consider that fighting fraud starts with effective prevention and deterrence, we can conclude that the court is at the very center of this endeavor. It would be reductionist or simplistic to state that the court is merely a source of information for Olaf and now the EPO. Here you can see a list of do's and don'ts for the court's auditors, which result from our mandate. Our auditors are fully aware of their role, that they do not conduct investigations, that they are not responsible for proving fraud and that they should not, for instance, interview suspects, retain original documents, take any risks with their personal safety. Once they come across a suspicion of fraud, they are obliged to document it and to report it. We identify potential cases mainly during the audit work. We also receive denunciations from third parties. However, we do not forward every case identified by auditors or received as a denunciation to OLAF or the EPO. There is an internal filtering mechanism. Every case is analyzed by the legal service. The final decision whether to refer the case to OLAF or the EPO is taken by the president of the court, so at the highest level. The legal service makes recommendations to the president, and in our analysis, we take into account whether the case is based on objective and substantiated elements. We also analyze the impact of the case on the EU budget, although obviously with zero tolerance for fraud policy, there is no threshold on the amounts at stake. Since June this year, we cooperated with the EPO, and we transmit information directly to the office. We do not make use of OLAF in this respect. To select cases that will go, that will be sent directly to EPO, we take into account, of course, the material, personal, territorial, and temporal competence of the office, as set out in the PIF directive and the EPO regulation. The main challenge now is to distinguish cases that should be forwarded to OLAF from those that should be transferred to the EPO. We are on a quite steep learning curve here. So it is crucial for us how OLAF and the EPO will interpret and act on their respective mandates. To give you an idea about the scale of the court's activity and the number of cases reported to OLAF each year, the court reviews around 700 transactions each year for its annual report on the implementation of the EU general budget. In 2020, we reported to OLAF 6 cases of suspected fraud, and all our notifications led to the opening of OLAF investigation. In 2019, we sent to OLAF 9 cases, and 6 resulted in investigations. In 2018, we forwarded 9 cases, but only 2 resulted in investigations. However, the number of the forwarded cases says very little about the impact, the actual impact of such cases, in particular their financial impact. It is quite often that cases forwarded to OLAF are part of a larger scheme or reveal a specific fraud type in a given member state. So one case can be replicated, and it is for OLAF to connect the dots. The financial impact of our cases is also not negligible. One single case identified some years ago amounted to a recovery recommendation of 228 million euros. To measure the actual impact of our work, it is crucial for us, and I will also come back to this later, to receive information on the follow-up of OLAF recommendations and the actual recoveries. As you can see, over the last years, there is an increase in the opening of OLAF investigations following the transfer of cases by the court. This is due to our very good cooperation with OLAF on an operational level. We continuously improve concrete exchanges of information. Our aim is to be as exhaustive as possible on factual and legal aspects when notifying cases to OLAF. As regards denunciations from third parties, our experience shows that only a very small number of such denunciations is transferred to OLAF. In 2020, we received 8 denunciations and none were reported to OLAF. In 2019, 2 of the total number of 11 denunciations were forwarded to Olaf. Denunciations are often of limited substance. They do not relate to fraud at all, or simply repeat other sources, such as press articles. In addition, identical denunciations are often addressed directly to the Commission and Olaf. The cases forwarded to Olaf cover different areas of expenditure, but not surprisingly, mostly agricultural funds, which still represent a large part of the EU budget. The types of potential fraud that we deal with are recurrent. So the cases forwarded mainly concern declarations of costs not meeting the eligibility criteria, the artificial creation of the conditions required to receive EU funding, and serious irregularities in procurement procedures. Let me say a few words about our cooperation with Olaf and the EPO. It has always been clear for the court that in a complex and multi-layered EU anti-fraud architecture, the competent institutions must cooperate in a spirit of mutual trust. This is why in May 2019, the court signed an administrative arrangement with Olaf, and in September 2021, a comparable administrative agreement with the EPO. The main purpose of both agreements is to facilitate a timely exchange of information relating to the alleged fraud. Both agreements designate contact points in the respective institutions. They also establish secure communication channels to preserve the confidentiality of exchanges. Both agreements contain also very important provisions on non-operational cooperation, such as joint workshops and exchange of staff. Olaf and the ECHA have already organized 2 joint annual workshops, one virtual for obvious reasons. There will be one more joint workshop at the end of October. So as you can see, we cooperate, we share our respective expertise, experience, and risk analysis. The exchange of staff with Olaf will resume as soon as the sanitary situation allows for this. Finally, despite our positive and efficient cooperation with Olaf, the question of what could be improved still remains. On our side, we aim at giving more details when notifying cases to Olaf. On Olaf's side, our reporting to Olaf is obviously not a one-way street. Olaf informs us whether it opens an investigation on the basis of the information that we provided. The office also informs us about the outcome of its investigations, so whether it decides to issue recommendations and what type of recommendations. However, and Mr. Bianchi also referred to this, we do not receive any systemic feedback on the follow-up of the recommendations in terms of charges brought by national prosecutors, court judgments, and actual recoveries. So the situation has improved, but there is still a room for improvement in this area, in this respect. We are, of course, perfectly aware of the difficulties to follow up the actual outcomes, that it might take years, etc. However, such real outcomes are crucial for us, as they show the actual impact of our work. Better follow-up would allow our auditors to readapt their methodology when necessary. The court could also better articulate its strategic objectives and multi-annual working programs as regards potential fraud. But most importantly, only the real outcomes, such as actual recoveries, can demonstrate the actual level of protection of the EU financial interests and the effectiveness of this protection. On that note, please allow me to finish my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Marta, for your very interesting picture of the competence of ECA and for the first information about statistical data. I hoped to have the new report of the Commission on the protection of the financial interests of the European Union, but it is now lacking. So we are exactly in time. Noi possiamo prenderci un lungo.
We can have a long coffee break. Yeah. We are just in time, so I'd like to thank all speakers that have been speaking precisely according to their time limit as well. Then the coffee break will help us organize the debate later on. Thank you.
Se volete accomodarvi, iniziamo il dibattito. Allora, se credete iniziamo il dibattito e...
Let us open the discussion. First of all, once again, a big word of thanks to you all. I think that this discussion will be a very useful and informative debate. Also, in light of what was said in the opening addresses and the various presentations, there are some colleagues who are connected in remote and they followed today's session. If they want to take into part in the discussion, you can sort of use the chat to put questions so we can see your questions and then each one of us will try and answer the questions. But you are in a proper position to see the chat, so I may be distracted, but you can sort of pick up something which is interesting to discuss. As the speakers this morning have been very informative, I'd like to ask two questions to the audience. The first question is the following. This morning, there was something which was missing. In two presentations, there was something which was mentioned. It's Article 86 says, and I quote, that EPPO was designed on the basis of Eurojust. So in the landscape that we have mentioned this morning, does Eurojust have a role? The external relations of the 22 countries of PPO with the 5 countries that are not part of the 22 countries. What are the relationships between the two? Well, I think there is something that we could say about that. This has come to mind. Maybe it will be dealt with in the next sessions, but I just wanted to raise the point for your consideration. Now, the second question, which I think we should consider, starting with today, even though we're talking about administrative law, European administrative law, concerns the relationship of this complex administrative structure with the EPPO. And I think that we should start effectively on the basis of collaboration. But we already know that there are some frictions which exist. So let's try and reflect on these 2 points and further points that will be raised by you all. And I thank you. And I just ask if anyone wishes to take the floor. So those who want to take the floor should come up here to the head table.
Grazie.
Thank you. I followed with great interest and attention the presentations given in the first session. So I'm very grateful to the speakers for introducing this picture. As I was listening to what they said, something came to mind which is along the lines of what Mrs. Parisi said a while ago. I have a question, a point which I'd like to make from a functional and a political sort of point of view. In my brief address this morning, I introduced a question about some open issues. Well, but not something which is open in theoretical terms, but questions that have to do with coordination, with the organizational arrangements, questions which might be defined as under the heading of competencies. Since this is something that we can all sort of perceive, so it would be appropriate for us to try and deal with them at this stage. When you deal with these issues at a political level, at an institutional level, we're all aware that the various logics of the various organizations and institutions will prevail or will have an impact, a very strong impact on the nature of the debate and the proposed solutions. Well, here we feel free and it's a more informal setting where the organizer, the Fondazione Basso, has been for 20 years involved in the construction of European institutions, and since 2013 has been involved in the themes that we are considering today. We are in a better position to define the possible difficulties, frictions, so that we can think in terms of possible solutions that could be put on the table at political level or institutional level when such problems may arise. So this is an invitation which I'd like to extend to all speakers and mostly to all those that will take the floor later on in the next sessions that can sort of think in terms of contributing to such issues. It would be important that they all be involved in sort of helping us sort of allay the fears and concerns that we have. And then if we do have concerns which are shared by others, we can solve them together. Thank you, President. Certainly we have got to be very clear from an intellectual standpoint to use this informal setting to ensure that we can help define also the behavior of institutions themselves. Any further comments?
Prego, la signora, grazie. Chiedo una, sì, ho visto. Chiedo una cortesia.
Could you kindly come up here? Well, we don't know each other, so with the face mask, I can't recognize the people. I would like to ask all who want to take the floor to introduce themselves. I'd like to thank the Fondazione Basso for the
My name is Lorena Bachmeier. I'm professor in Complutense University Madrid. And I've been following with much interest all the presentations, but my question is not a general comment, but a very precise one to Mr. Bianchi, whose presentation I really enjoyed very much. And he realized that there's more to be done and you're doing much more. But there's a very practical issue, which is limited resources. And how are you facing this unprecedented amount that you will have to control right now and in the next future with the resources you have? And if there is any willingness, we have been seeing that the resources in the budget are not, politicians are not very much keen to improve the amount for your office to deal effectively. The second question was, I mean, that's a policy issue, no? But I mean, will you be able really with the resources you have to deal with the next challenges? And my next question is, listening to the representative of the Court of Auditors, they send you reports and they themselves made the self-criticisms that they don't get enough feedback in order to present you more detailed reports. And whether this feedback is going to be improved or not. And on the other side, if the reports you get from the Court of Auditors are really useful for you or they are too general, because from the statistics that were presented this morning, we can deduce that not many investigations, so not half of the reports led to investigations. So what is the problem there? Is a problem of coordination? Is a problem of a different threshold? Is a problem also of lacking resources in the Court of Auditors? And my final question is, you mentioned that there is a lot of digital resources that at the national level can be implemented to really audit and monitor the expenditures, but this is not mandatory to be used by the member states. Shouldn't this be the first step to be addressed? So thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to make these questions. Thanks.
Thank you to you,
Lorena.
And penso che sarebbe...
I think it would be worthwhile to ask a few more questions, and I ask my colleague to come up here. And then the various speakers will decide if they want to answer. I see clearly that some of the questions are directed to other speakers here on the table, but it could be also an internal debate. Thank you.
Yes, now I'm on. Yes. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I am Katalin Ligeti. I'm a professor of European and International Criminal Law from the University of Luxembourg. I listened to the first panel very attentively, and I was triggered in two ways of what I heard. And this is where my question also goes to. I heard a lot of interesting notions like administrative intelligence and a few other notions. I wonder if you could detail what is really administrative intelligence and what other intelligence Olaf also deals with. And I listened with a lot of interest to what you said about improving the analytical capacities in terms of pooling data and creating analytical files at the European level, if I understand correctly, with the cooperation of national authorities. I wonder whether this means that the Commission, and in particularly Olaf, is aiming at, so to say, breaking up the boundaries of sectoral enforcement and creating a larger, more harmonized enforcement system. And if this is the case, I don't know if my thinking as an academic is going too far. If this is the case, I wonder to which extent the limitation of competence of the different authorities allows you to do this. If I may challenge you very directly on this, can actually Olaf treat all this data? I stop here.
Thanks, Kathleen.
We have some other questions, so we give the time to speakers to answer the questions. I'll start with the speaker who is here at the table. So we can start from the table. I always feel that it's better when people can see each other. So, Dr. Bianchi, you should respond to some of the questions.
La risposta. Grazie.
Grazie mille. Thank you very much. And thank you for these interesting questions. I hope I have answers to all of them. Let's start with the point that you made, Mrs. Barmeyer, about the resources that the office has today. They are limited. I just gave you the number. There's about 350 of us, and no plan to increase those resources so far. It's a general problem of the EU budget. It's not something that particularly targets Olaf. Now, what can we do with the resources that we have? You asked a very specific question. Would you be able to deal with all of those challenges with 350 people? If we were on our own, the answer would be no. And that is why we've been working and will continue working in a spirit of community. We need to achieve a result where we pull together everything that we can pull together for that result. As I said in my presentation, it is impossible to think for anyone that central level controls and activities in Brussels, or when I say Brussels, I mean The Hague, I mean Luxembourg, I mean The Hague, I mean the EU level, will be able to achieve any results on the ground really without using also the authorities that are in the first line of control and audit on the ground. So our answer to the limited resources that we have, and even if we get 200 people more, it would still be too little compared to the challenges that we have ahead of us, is to work together. Now, working together doesn't necessarily mean scrambling around and passing information and just doing things. It means working with an aim, a shared aim, in an environment of trust. Now, it's easy to say, it's not as easy to do, but You mentioned, for example, the European Court of Auditors. We saw it from the figures that were presented at the very beginning or years ago. The success rate, if you want, of the cases that the European Court of Auditors were signaling to Olaf was lower than it is today. Now, what has happened to improve that situation? Well, that is dialogue. We've been working together more closely with the colleagues in the European Court of Auditors. We've been talking to them. They've been talking to us. We've been exchanging and giving each other feedback, which is the most important thing if you want to begin a process of cooperation and building that trust that you need so much. So over the years, we hope that we will see more and more targeted reporting from the European Court of Auditors to Olaf, and of course targeted feedback, because they have a point. If we don't give them feedback, they have no way of knowing if they're giving us the right things or not, or if another thing that we corrected, when we don't take things up, why don't we take them up? And this applies to all other types of cooperation that we have, and it's certainly essential that we do this with the EPO, with which we've created from the very beginning a very strong structural dialogue to make sure that we never get there. We've signed cooperation agreement with them as well, but besides agreements, it is really that notion of communication almost every day that you need to have with your partners. Again, it's very consuming in terms of resources. And you referred also to the notion of data pools, and why are the data pools not mandatory? Why is Arachne not mandatory? It's a very good question. We have what we have. For the time being, what we are trying to do with all of the member states, and as I said, we sit at the table with the colleagues from the Commission when we discuss the implementation of the control chapters in the national plans for the RRF, we look at how they're going to record data, how they're going to keep that data, who has access to that data, and how that data will be actually used and made available for audits and controls at national level, and then later on in a sort of random ex post way in Brussels. And what is emerging is that there are cases in which some member states are saying, okay, I've been using Arachne in the past. Arachne is a data mining tool. I will continue using this for the RRF. There are other situations where that conclusion is not so easy to make. And it's not so easy to make sometimes because, and you'd be surprised to learn, we still have offices in the European Union where IT, not really that, they still use Excel sheets. Now you can't do interoperability with Excel sheets, it's not possible. So I think what we're trying to do also in the discussions with the member states is we're trying to push them to use the RRF money to give themselves the IT that they need. And I think we need to face this challenge with in a pragmatic way, because it is not compulsory. You cannot say, I cannot say to anyone, well, you know, if you don't use Arachne, I'll investigate you to death. Of course, I cannot do that. So what we need to make sure that we do instead is that we use training, we use money, we use pressure, peer pressure even, to get everybody to use the same tools for monitoring. It may not happen immediately, but logically that's where we want to go. And it is a challenge. And the problem with cooperation with so many actors, I mentioned a few of the actors today, I can even make the list longer, is focus. You can't cooperate on everything. You need to have a focus. You need to have clear priorities, like risk management. You need to know where your priorities lie. And that's something that we want to do together. We want to do this together with our partners in the world of Brussels, in the world of the EU, and we want to do this together with the members, not against national and regional authorities. That you mentioned the resource problems for Olaf, but they have them too. I mean, we know of offices that have been, if you take customs, The customs have been reduced, the numbers of people that work in custom offices in the member states, but the system wants more and more and more from them. They went from just doing collection of customs duty to drugs, terrorism, explosive, with the same amount of people, or even less. So I think the only way that we have really all of us is to do this together with focus and with target and with dialogue. And it's a big challenge, I know. So I don't want to sound like I'm coming from, because I live in Belgium, from the land of the Smurfs. I know it's not easy, but I know there's no other, I mean, it's the only show in town, really. On the questions on, I'm sorry if I really didn't get your family name, so I'm going to call you Catherine, sorry. Administrative intelligence. I mean, intelligence is a word that is always accompanied with a lot of suspicion. You know, you hear intelligence, you go like, oh God, the CIA, something strange. No, intelligence in our language is just data that you can use. It's operationalized, digested data. I can give you raw data, they won't tell you much. If I give you intelligence, I have used the data to distill, if you want, a warning, or to distill a topic, or to distill a fraud pattern. And administrative intelligence means putting together all the data that we have from different databases. I won't be theoretical, I'll give you an example immediately. One of the lessons we learned with the COVID inquiries that we opened last year already, immediately, was that we saw there was a very easily exploitable way of getting COVID products into Europe, of any quality, really. Beyond the immediate emergency where we opened the borders and we had no checks because we had no face masks, but when things got a bit better and we reinstalled controls, we still had a hard reality of face masks arriving from China physically into a port or an airport in a member state, let's say Germany or the Netherlands or Belgium. The customs clearance was not necessarily done in that member state because there's transit procedures that allow you to do the customs clearance in another member state if you want to. If you say, I'm going to sell these masks in Spain, I'll do the customs clearance in Spain. Usually, when you go through customs check on a product that has a certification attached to it, you have at the airport or at the port, I will visualize it, two tables. There's the customs people, and then there's the certification people that look at whether you're saying it's an FFP2 mask. Okay, does it look okay? So there's a check on that certification. If you break the customs clearance and you do it somewhere else, immediately you have assumptions that run all across Europe of a face mask that has arrived in the Netherlands that is taken for customs clearance in Spain. The assumption is when they are custom cleared in Spain that the certification has been checked in the Netherlands because that's where they have arrived. So the Spanish certification authority is not involved, doesn't even step in, does not even have the data. And when I say administrative intelligence is when you put together the data of the arrival physically and in customs clearance that we see in OLAF, together with the data that we had to build about who was certifying what. If you do that, you immediately see that you can very quickly alert authorities that are supposed to be checking about the need to check what is getting there. This is what is administrative intelligence, and the analytical capacity that we have today by using the databases that we have allows us to do this. In the COVID investigation, we learned to do this fairly quickly. We can automatize those processes. It's not really a problem. We have IT. In the ideal world, and that's the point I was making, we should get to the point where we use artificial intelligence to pre-process those data. Take e-commerce. E-commerce traditionally, instead of having one container arriving, you have instead of having say one transaction, you have individual parcels. So all of a sudden you have 10,000 transactions to check. So if you multiply this across the board, you see that the data that you have suddenly explodes. It's enormous. So you need to have machine help to pre-process some of the data, and machine help doesn't mean that Big Brother comes in and checks everything. It means that you're inputting risk management profiles and you're focusing the checks on certain areas of risk that you have detected. Sectoral enforcement, how do you move from a sectoral enforcement to enforcement community? Well, it's also a big question. The lessons that we draw very often from our investigations, administrative investigation in the member states, is that sectoral enforcement is a reality everywhere now. We have sectoral enforcement syndromes everywhere, and the only cure that we can find to that is cooperation and trust and dialogue, but not structural cooperation. I'll meet once a year to, take a picture together and that's it. No, you need to have focus on the cooperation, on what you want to cooperate on, and you really have to focus on operational results. I mentioned the need, for example, to bring together intelligence sources that we have in criminal investigations, in anti-terrorism investigation, in organized crime investigations, together with what we have. And that can be very useful because it can really show how on the ground you can get results in prevention, results in deterring, results in investigating and prosecuting later, because you have put together the data that you need to put together. Data that are currently scattered all over the place with an enforcement community with different priorities. Last point, we've seen in many of our investigations that, for example, and I'll take the example of textiles and footwear from China. This was a huge problem in Italy, always has been, because Italy has an industry to protect and to make sure that they can work on a level playing field with textiles and footwear industries from other parts of the world. Other member states that do not have those industries, do not have that problem, never really focused the work of their customs on checking what kind of footwear and textiles were coming from China. And of course, this was picked up immediately by the fraudsters. And much as Italy had put in place extremely tight control at their borders, so the arrival from third countries, China mainly, in the ports of Trieste or any other port here in Italy, what was not getting in through the door was getting in through the window. It was arriving from the UK, it was arriving from the Netherlands, and then it's inside, and then it cannot be checked. So this is, again, how an enforcement community can become a better enforcement community without eliminating all of the differences that we have, which would be an impossible task to do politically as well. It's a very difficult topic. How you can make it function with just one brain. I hope I've answered all the questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to get back on any of the points that I might have forgotten. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Ernesto Bianchi, and if I can express a preference of mine, I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Marta Lazzuk, and finally only to President Monica Hohlmeier, because her comprehensive and political general position is a member of the parliament. So if Marta intends to enter in our discussion, please.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Chair. As far as our points are concerned and the Court of Auditors is concerned, indeed, our cooperation with Olaf is excellent and is improving, especially since the entry into force of the administrative agreement from 2019. So on an operational level, we talk to colleagues on almost everyday basis. We exchange information, we exchange intelligence, risk analysis. So you can see the impact of this cooperation in the number of cases, in the number of open investigations. On the number of cases, I understood the comment from one of the interveners that maybe we should send more cases to Olaf. Well, the thing is that we identify irregularities, errors, we report them in our annual report. Obviously, we cannot communicate everything to Olaf because it would be completely inefficient. It would be an extra workload, extra burden for the office. And I believe that Olaf colleagues also read our annual reports and they have access to this data. So we have this internal filtering mechanism. We need this internal filtering mechanism. There was one interesting issue raised by the president, Mr. President. He mentioned the issue of competence and potential conflict of competence between the responsible bodies, especially Olaf and the EPO. And I can say that indeed this is absolutely crucial for us right now, how EPO and Olaf will act on their respective mandates, on their competence, because I think that we live a bit in a constructive ambiguity right now with the legal framework, which is not necessarily absolutely clear. So we report to Olaf the PIF offenses, the non-PIF offenses, to EPO, the PIF offenses, the non-PIF offenses to Olaf. Should we report something else, irregularities to Olaf? It's an open question. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Marta. Il presidente della commissione CONT.
The chair of the CONT committee had to leave us for institutional roles, so we'll express these questions to the vice president of the CONT commission that will be with us at the fourth session of our workshop. So I'd like to ask all those who are with us if we can have any questions to ask in this last part of the morning session. If not, we'll just break for lunch. We have no choice. Good. I understand. We shall meet at lunch and we'll reconvene at 2:30 with the second session.